Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. We have 3 topics for tonight. 3 topics are the synergy created by Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO, and BRICS. And we'll be talking about that for some time. We'll also be talking about a new post by Scott Ritter called The Children of the Camps. As you'll see, that is one hell of a post. It's about the life of Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, recently killed in a firefight by the Israelis. And our third topic for tonight is a call for the liberation of the Levant in a very striking post by Alana Mercer. It's just a very, very comprehensive and moving post, and very, very long. And we're going to address that post here too for tonight. I think this is going to be a pretty extraordinary show. I urge you to share, like, and subscribe, get other people here so we can have decent folks here. Hey, Dolores, I see you're commenting from Twitter. I didn't know that Twitter comments could be addressed here. That's an interesting development. Anyway, thanks for coming. It's very good to see you here, Dee. I'm going to move on to the first of our topics, which is addressed in a post by Pepe Escobar. It's a brilliant post, as usual. I'll be reading it and commenting on it. The headline is The Geoeconomic Drivers of SCO-BRICS Synergy. This was published on October 18th, 2024. And the caption on the picture is Indivisibility of Security as envisioned by Russia-China amounts to the de facto application of the UN Charter. The result would be a peace on a global level and by implication the death knell to NATO. Hang on for a minute. I have to ask something, of Bonnie. But let me mute myself for a moment. Okay, so let me continue on now. Before I continue on, let me share this on Facebook so I make sure we get more folks here. Okay, that should take care of that. Now back to Pepe. The indivisibility of security, this is the caption again, as envisaged by Russia China, amounts to the de facto application of the UN Charter. The result would be peace on a global level, and by implication, the death knell to NATO. 1 week before the absolutely crucial BRICS summit in Kazan, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization held a summit, in Islamabad. Of course, that's in Pakistan. This convergence is important in more ways than one. The summit in Pakistan involved the Council of the Heads of Government of SCO member states. Out of it came a joint communique stressing the need to implement decisions taken at the SCO annual summit last July in Astana. That's where the heads of state actually gathered, including new SCO full member Iran. China, following the rotating SCO chairmanship of close ally Pakistan, now under a dodgy administration, fully endorsed by the military goons who keep ultra-popular former Prime Minister Imran Khan in jail, has officially taken over the SCO presidency for 2024 to 2025. And the name of the game, predictably, is business. The motto of the Chinese presidency is, what else? Quote, action, unquote. So Beijing took no time to start promoting further, faster synergy between the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, and the Eurasia Economic Union, the EAEU, whose predominant power is Russia. Cue to the Russia-Chinese strategic partnership, fast advancing trans-Eurasia economic corridors. That brings us to a couple of key connectivity subplots featured prominently at the Islamabad summit. Next section is called Riding the Steppe, and you'll see why in just a minute. Let's start with the fascinating steppe road, which is a Mongolian idea crystallizing as an upgraded economic corridor. Mongolia is an observer at the SCO, not a full member. Reasons for it are quite complex. Still, Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin, or I should say Mishustin, raved about the steppe road with his SCO interlocutors. The Mongolians came up with the idea, of Tallinn Zam, or quote, steppe road, unquote, in the Mongolian language, back in 2014, containing no less than, quote, 5 great passages, a maze of transport and energy infrastructure to be built with investments totaling at least $50 million. Now, I have to comment here, Mongolia, while a fairly large country in terms of area, is a very small country in population. Off the top of my head, I'm going to guess it might have 5 million people in it, or something like that. So it is small. I should probably just check the Mongolian population before I go further. I can easily look up. In 2024, the population of Mongolia was 3.4 million people. So I wasn't really too far off, my guess. at the population. What I want to emphasize here is that investments totaling at least $50 billion in a country with 3.4 million people is going to absolutely transform that country. That is a huge investment. These include a 997-kilometer long transnational expressway linking Russia and China, an 1,100-kilometer of electrified railway infrastructure, the expansion of the already running Trans-Mongolian Railway from Sukbatar to the north to Zaman Ud in the south, and Pipelanistan, of course, as in new oil and gas pipelines linking Altan Bulag in the north to Zaman Ud. Mongolian Prime Minister, I guess the name is Oyen Ordin Lovsanamsarai, that is a tongue twister, was as enthusiastic as Mishustin, announcing that Mongolia has already finished 33 step road projects. These projects happen to neatly align with Russia's own Trans-Eurasian Corridor, a connectivity maze which includes the Trans-Siberian Railway, the Trans-Manchurian Railway, the Trans-Mongolian Railway, and the Baikal-Amur Main Line, or BAM, B-A-M. Back in July at the SCO summit, Putin and Mongolian President Ukhnagin Kurelsuk spent quite some time discussing the finer strategic points of Eurasian logistics. Then Putin visited Mongolia in early September for the 85th anniversary of the joint Soviet-Mongolian victory over the Japanese at the Khalkhin-Gol River. Putin was received as a rock star. All that makes perfect strategic sense. The Russia-Mongolian border is 3,485 kilometers long. That's approaching 2,000 miles. The USSR and the Mongolian People's Republic established diplomatic relations over a century ago in 1921. They have been working together on key projects such as the Trans-Mongolian gas pipeline, yet another Russia-China connection, the modernization of the Ulaanbaatar railway joint venture, Russia supplying fuel to the new Genghis Khan International Airport. Okay, I guess I have to remark here, they're naming an airport after Genghis Khan. The great conqueror Genghis Khan, who devastated huge areas of Asia back, what was it, the 13th century or 14th century, and they're naming an airport after Genghis Khan. And Rosatom building a new nuclear power plant. Mongolia harbors the proverbial wealth of natural resources, from rare earth minerals. Reserves may reach an astonishing 31 million tons. That is astonishing. To uranium, prospective reserves of 1.3 million tons. Even as it applies what is called the third neighbor approach, Mongolia needs to maintain a careful balancing act, as it is on the radar nonstop of the US and EU, with the collective West pressing for less Eurasia cooperation with Russia, China, of course. Naturally, Russia holds a major strategic advantage over the West, as Moscow not only treats Mongolia as an equal partner, yes, a nation of 150 million people is treating a nation of 3 million people as an equal partner. That can win you friends and influence people in the 3.5 million population country that can provide its neighbors' needs when it comes to energy security. What makes it all even more enticing is that Beijing envisions the step road as, quote, highly consistent, unquote, with the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, complete with the proverbial enthusiasm, hailing the synergy and, quote, win-win cooperation, unquote, between both projects. This is not, okay, a military alliance. Complementing the step road drive, Chinese Premier Li Qiang, I think that's how you pronounce his name, went to Pakistan not only for the SCO summit, but with the connectivity priority, advancing the next stage of the 65 billion China-Pakistan economic corridor, CPEC, arguably BRI's flagship project. Pakistan, historically, of course, was a very strong ally, okay, of the United States, and arguably still strong in certain respects. But of course, the future there is collaboration with China. We can, immediately see that. Lee and his Pakistani counterpart, Sharif, finally inaugurated the strategically crucial Chinese-financed Gwadar International Airport in southwest Balochistan against all odds, plus intermittent raids by CIA-funded separatist Balak guerrillas. CPEC is an extremely ambitious multi-level infrastructure development project encompassing several nodes starting from the China-Pakistan border in the Kunjarab Pass down through the upgraded Karakoram Highway and descending south across Balochistan all the way to the Arabian Sea. That is quite a corridor. In the future, CPEC may even include a gas pipeline from Gwadar going up north all the way to Xinjiang province, further easing China's reliance on energy transported across the Strait of Malacca, which could be blocked by the hegemon in no time. Of course, for those of you who are not aware, the hegemon is us. The pre-BRICS SCO summit in Pakistan once again reiterated the synergy of several aspects concerning both of the multilateral bodies, both BRICS and SCO, that is. SCO member states, from the Central Asians to India and Pakistan, overwhelmingly understand Russian reasoning when it comes to the inevitability of the special military operation, the SMO, in Ukraine, of course. The Chinese position, officially, is a marvel of equilibrium and suave ambiguity, even as Beijing stresses the support for the principle of national sovereignty. It has not condemned Russia, and at the same time, it has never directly blamed NATO for the de facto war. Geoeconomic connectivity is very much the priority for top SCO powers and strategic partners Russia, China. Since the early 2000s, the SCO has evolved from counterterrorism to geoeconomic cooperation. Once again, in Islamabad, it was clear that the SCO will not turn into a military alliance in an anti-NATO uh, 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 type of mold. What matters most now for all members, apart from the geoeconomic cooperation, is to combat the West's war of terror, bound to go on overdrive with the imminent, humiliating failure of Project Ukraine. So here, Pepe, is predicting that because the collective West is losing the war in Ukraine and sustaining a humiliating defeat, in compensation for that, it's going to prosecute a comprehensive war of terror in a large part, of Eurasia. So that's an interesting prediction, I think, on Pepe's part, and one we ought to really pay attention to, because that's probably going to be the next front following a defeat, in Ukraine, a war of terror. We need to watch for that. Going further, one mechanism that could further solidify the SCO and pave the way for a merger with BRICS further on down the rocky road is the Chinese concept of global security initiative, which happens to dovetail with the Russian concept presented to and rejected by the United States in December 2021, only 2 months before the inevitability of the SMO. Again, the military operation inside of Ukraine. China proposes to, quote, uphold the principle of indivisible security, unquote, as well as, quote, build a balanced, effective, and sustainable security architecture, unquote, and firmly oppose, quote, the building of national security on the basis of insecurity of other countries, unquote. That's something that every member of the SCO, not to mention BRICS, subscribes to. In a nutshell, indivisibility of security, as envisaged by Russia, China, amounts to the de facto application of the UN Charter. The result would be peace on a global level, and by implication, the death knell to NATO. I think that's a very interesting conclusion on Pepe's part. While indivisibility of security still can't be adopted Eurasia-wide, as the hegemon deploys a war of terror in several fronts to undermine the emergence of a multinodal world, win-win cross-border connectivity keeps on rolling, from the Steppe Road to new Silk Road corridors. That last observation, I think, is very penetrating, and very important. In spite of the war of terror that our CIA is carrying out, in these areas, still, their building of connectivity, their attempt to integrate Europe and Asia across a vast area, just keeps on rolling, keeps on continuing. They keep on building. They keep on achieving key steps towards the integration of Europe, and Asia. That is so very important for the future of this century. I believe the CIA and we fighting a losing battle in trying to block this. I think instead, what we ought to do is to collaborate with it. There's business to be done there. It would be good for us. And really, if the rest of the world is secure and prosperous, and we are secure and prosperous, that is the best future for us as well. And I surely wish we would stop trying to block this kind of future and to integrate and collaborate with it instead. This article by Pepe was republished from the Strategic Culture Foundation by permission of the author, okay, or a representative. The only reason why we could stream on Facebook, as we are now doing, and present this article to you is because it also appears at uns.com. If I tried to bring the article from Strategic Culture Foundation, I would be blocked by Facebook. So keep that in mind. This is very important news. It's important for Western ears to hear this news, to know what's happening, but Facebook is trying to censor it. Nobody knows why this makes any sense, okay, at all. I don't think that it does. I'll check your comments now. Evelina leaves an icon, which I cannot see in this interface. And Cora Manuel is here and says, hi, everyone. Robert says, Russia has a population of as of January 2024 of 146.15 million people. So my guess of 150 million people was pretty close, wasn't it, Robert? And the population of Russia is falling. Those are the projections, but you know what? I'm willing to place a bet that that population is not going to be falling much longer. The population of Russia fell. It was at 150 million, and it fell by 10 million people during the 1990s. But I don't think it's going to be falling anymore because the economy of Russia is very strong, and all these projects it's engaging in with China is going to be very stimulated. Robert says, I don't believe Ukraine is losing the war as it is more of a stalemate. Robert, come and tell me that when it's the new year. It's October now. Come back, okay, and tell me that again, okay, in early January. And we will see where we are. I don't believe Ukraine is losing the war. I mean, Ukraine has lost 600,000 soldiers, Robert. 600,000 soldiers. It has been depopulated from 40 million to 18 million people. And you're telling me that you don't believe Ukraine is losing the war? What the hell are you reading? Newsweek? Time? I mean, what other nonsense do you read? Anyway, I will quit strongly disagreeing with you and go on to the next piece, which I know you're going to very strongly disagree with. You may want to leave because it's a piece by one of your special non-favorites, specifically Scott Ritter. Can you make a comment?
No. Can I make my tea?
Sure, go ahead and make your tea. Okay, so this piece is from Scott Ritter's Substack, um, Scott Ritter Extra, and it starts off with a picture. By the way, it's dated October 18th. Starts off with a picture of Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, who was just killed in a firefight with Israeli troops. There he is giving a talk, I know not where. Scott says, Yahya Sinwar was killed fighting Israeli soldiers in the ruins of Gaza. His death will serve as an inspiration for Palestinians for years to come. If there is to be a free and independent Palestine, it will be because of the sacrifice made by Yahya Sinwar in the cause of its creation. He is the true father of Palestine. He was a child of the camps, born into captivity in the Gazan Khan Yunis refugee camp, the son of Palestinian citizens of Majdal Ascalon, which is the present-day city of Ashkelon, who were forcibly driven from their homes by Israeli forces in 1948 in what is referred to as the Nakba, or catastrophe. He was one of the first to join Hamas when it broke away from the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood in 1987 and founded the Majid, or Security Services of Hamas, which he commanded. From the start, he recognized that purging Hamas and the Palestinian population of Israeli agents was a top priority, a prerequisite for success. When he was arrested by the Israelis and sentenced to 4 life terms for his involvement in the abduction and subsequent deaths of 2 Israeli soldiers, he openly confessed to killing 12 Israeli informants. In prison, he emerged as the leader of Hamas, organizing the prisoners behind bars and coordinating with Hamas leaders in Gaza. He studied Hebrew and the Israeli people and nation, captured his experiences in a novel, quote unquote, The Thorn and the Carnation, which he noted was fictional, despite every incident described being true. I haven't had a chance to read that novel. Here is evidently a cover of part 1. The author is Yahya al-Sinwar, and he's holding up the book. He was released from prison in 2011, part of a prisoner exchange agreed to by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He quickly rose up the ranks of Hamas, bringing its political and military wings into harmony and working to incorporate Hamas into the so-called, quote, axis of resistance, unquote, led by Iran, which included Hezbollah in Lebanon and Ansarallah in Yemen. He married shortly after being released from prison, and his wife, who holds a master's degree in theology from the Islamic University of Gaza, blessed him with 3 children, including an eldest son, Ibrahim, from whom he took his honorific Abi Ibrahim, which translates as, quote, the father of Ibrahim, unquote. He swore that his progeny would not be condemned to spend their lives as children of the camps. To this end, he helped plan and execute the October 7th, 2023 attack on Israel. The attack resulted in more than 1,200 Israeli deaths, more than a third of whom were soldiers, and of the rest, more than half were killed by Israeli forces as part of the, quote, Hannibal Directive, in which the Israeli Defense Force is tasked with killing any Israeli captive so as to prevent subsequent political pressure being brought on Israeli leadership for the kind of prisoner swap that had led to his own release. I have to pause here and have to point out the attack resulted in more than 1,200 Israeli deaths, but according to Scott, more than a third of them were soldiers. And since the Hamas attack was an act of resistance justified by the fact that Gaza was occupied by Israel and had the status of an occupied area, we must remember that according to international law, the population has the right to resist against the occupiers, whereas the occupiers do not have the right to self-defense inside of the occupied area. That is not a right recognized by international law. Israel constantly claims the right of self-defense, but it didn't have the right to defend itself by attacking the occupied area, which it should not even have been occupying in the first place. But the point here is more than a third of whom were soldiers. That means more than 400, let's say 450 to 500, were soldiers. And of the rest, in other words, the remaining 750, let us say, more than half were killed by Israeli forces as part of the Hannibal Directive. If you do the arithmetic on this, if Scott is right, what it means is that the only civilians who were killed by Hamas in the October 7th attack, there were roughly 375 civilians who were killed, not 1,200 civilians. And most of the 1,200 Israeli deaths were the fault of Israel, because there were 450 soldiers, roughly speaking, and another 375 that were killed as a result of the Hannibal Directive. So people who rant and rave about how Hamas killed 1,200 people, no, they did not. At a maximum, they killed only 375 civilians. Whereas Israel has now killed probably in excess of 200,000 civilians. Going on. He had spent a lifetime studying the Israelis, and he knew them like the back of his hand. He knew that by humiliating the Israeli military and security forces, by taking hundreds of Israelis prisoners, that would compel the Israeli nation to shed the thin veneer of civility and humanity it wore like a cloak to deceive the world, and instead compel the Israelis to show to the world the truth about who they really were. It's specifically a nation who believed that they were above all others in the world, whose self-proclaimed status as God's chosen people, unquote, allowed them to lord over the, quote, human animals, unquote, who did not profess their faith. The raping, the murdering, and robbing at will without fear of consequence, which of course is what the Israelis have been doing. He knew Israel would fully implement its cruel Dahiyya doctrine of collective punishment, murdering tens of thousands of Palestinians because of their collective rage at being humiliated by Hamas. There's a picture of the devastation, the destruction of Gaza by Israel in retaliation for Hamas's killing of 375 Israeli civilians. To say that it is disproportionate is the understatement of the year. To say that it is a war crime is no more than the truth. To say that it is ethnic cleansing and genocide is also no more the truth, no more than the truth. And I have little doubt that the verdict of the International Court of Justice is going to justify that statement that I just made. He understood, going on with the article, the Israeli psychology, predicting that not only would they adapt an artificial intelligence-based targeting tool known as, quote, the lavender, unquote, that they would use to justify the bombing of civilian neighborhoods to kill low-level Hamas officials and their families, but that the Israelis would be compelled to brag about it, exposing their crimes to the world. He knew that Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, the name of the October 7th, 2023 attack on Israel, would set in motion events that would not only lead to the diminishment of Israel, but the emergence of a Palestinian homeland. He knew he was marked for death, often delivering public addresses in Gaza, after which he would announce to the press that he was walking home, openly daring Israel to kill him. And here's an advertisement from Scott. The Eisenhower Media Group and the U.S. Tour of Duty present Operation Dawn brunch in the Tudor City Steakhouse, which is at 45 Tudor City Place, New York, 10017, on Sunday, October 27th, from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Enjoy a delicious buffet brunch enhanced by a world-class moderated panel discussion featuring Randy Credico, Jimmy Dore, by Russell Dobular, Dennis Fritz, Danny Haifon, Garland Nixon, Jeff Norman, Diane Sarah, okay, and Larry Wilkerson, Colonel Wilkerson, that is. Panel A is entitled The Threat of Nuclear War in the World Today, and that is moderated by Scott Ritter. And panel B, The Assault on Free Speech, which is moderated by Jose Vega. Jose is a peace activist and is also an activist on a number of other issues. He's currently running for Congress. I forget the district, in New York City, but it's the district whose incumbent right now is Richie Torres. Richie Torres is notorious because he's been thoroughly bought, by the Israeli lobby uh, um, and by AIPAC, uh, 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 taking literally, I believe the figure is $1.4 million from them. Uh, he, of course, is extremely pro-Israel. Jose Vega is looking to throw him out of office, and Jose Vega is probably the most formidable of candidates uh, um, uh, um, uh, um, who is running as an independent. Uh, Certainly the most formidable inside of New York City since the run of AOC back in 2018. Jose is very, very impressive. And I'm sure his panel and Scott's will both contain lots of fireworks. Going on with the article, his death was a top priority of Israel in the days, weeks, and months following October 7, 2023. The Israelis tried to diminish him as a leader, spreading reports that painted him as a billionaire who enriched himself off of the misery of the Palestinian people, and a coward who hid beneath the ground, surrounded by his family and Israeli hostages, whom he used as human shields. In the end, he did die at the hands of the Israelis, but he did not die in a tunnel. He did not die surrounded by human shields. He died fighting at the command of Hamas fighters in the streets of Gaza. And there is drone imagery of Yahya Sinwar moments before his death. It was an accidental encounter, says Scott, where Israeli forces probing the ruins of Gaza made contact with several Hamas fighters. In the firefight that followed, Israeli tanks fired into the building where the fighters had positioned themselves. 4 of the Hamas fighters were killed when Israeli soldiers tried to make entry into the building. They were driven off by hand grenades thrown by the sole survivor who was badly wounded. Israeli infantry using anti-tank missiles fired into the building, severely wounding the surviving Hamas fighter. A drone was flown into the structure, revealing a defiant figure seated in a chair, glaring at the camera. One arm had been blown off the fighter, and his legs were badly mangled. With his one remaining arm, the fighter picked up a piece of wood and threw it at the drone. Armed with the knowledge of where the wounded Hamas fighter was, the Israelis again fired on the building, killing him. His name was Yahya Sinwar. He died a hero's death, leading his men in combat against the invader, so that his children and the children of other, quote, children of the camps, unquote, like himself, would one day know the freedom. There's a picture of Ismail Hania, who was recently assassinated by the Israelis while he was visiting um, um, Iran. I can't remember whether that was at the time of the funeral of the president of Iran. okay, or whether it was at the time of the inauguration, okay, of the new president. It was on one of those occasions, okay, and he was assassinated uh, by a missile, okay, or a drone, while staying in an Iranian state house as a guest, of the Iranians. That was, as I recall, was it back in April? No, it wasn't back in April. It was actually sometime after. But the retaliation on October 1st was partly a retaliation for the assassination of Hania, who was the political director, okay, of Hamas, and who was also at the time attempting to negotiate a peace with the Israelis. And the Israelis, Netanyahu, were targeting, you know, the peace negotiator, but for Hamas, pretty much to torpedo the negotiations and end any chance of peace. Well, that is my view anyway. So Hania in this picture is giving, okay, the victory sign, okay, and Sinwar is holding his eldest son, Ibrahim, okay, and is waving to the crowd and wearing a green cap. Yahya Sinwar, says Scott, has now been immortalized as a martyr in the most righteous cause imaginable, the birth of a nation trying to liberate its people from a cruel and unjust occupation. Over the course of the next days, Israel and the United States will seek to use Yahya Sinwar's death for propaganda purposes by appealing to the Palestinian people to reject his fate by surrendering to the tyranny of Israeli dominance and occupation. What the politicians in Tel Aviv and Washington, D.C. fail to understand is that the Palestinian people have already embraced the fate of Yahya Sinwar as their own, that they welcome the fate of martyrdom if it means that their children will live free as citizens of an independent Palestinian state. He was a child of the camps. He was born, okay, in the camps, raised and nourished by the camps, and he died defending the camps from the Israeli occupier, so that there would never again be generations of Palestinians whose lives were defined by the prison of the camps. In my view, that is a terrific memorial piece by Scott Ritter, who understands the fight for national independence, which the Palestinians are making, and who is able to write in a very emotional and inspiring way about that fight, okay, and its leader, who's been slain in the pursuit, okay, of independence. So, I will now move to your comments. How many soldiers did Russia lose? The estimates are at most 80,000. Evelina says, Robert, have a heart. Are you suggesting the country should fight until the last Ukrainian? I'm not sure Robert's suggesting that. I think he genuinely believes that Ukraine is not losing the war. Okay, when it's apparent to anybody outside of the U.S. media sources that they have totally lost this war, that it is all over but the shouting. So I see no comments on the Yaya Sinwar piece. I hope you'll share, like, and subscribe this. Uh, okay, I have attendance that's pretty good, okay, at this point. But the next piece is a particularly important one, and I'd like to see it graced with a really large audience. It's a piece by an Israeli woman by the name, okay, of Ilana Mercer. Just so we know who we're dealing with, I will start off with the statement at the end of her piece, which is very long. It will take me the next hour to go through this piece. It is very long, but it is brilliant. A brilliant piece, a brilliant post, and I am proud to be bringing it to you. Okay, so a biographical statement is Lana Mercer is a paleo-libertarian author, essayist and theorist. Her new book is The Paleo-Libertarian Guide to Deep Tech, Deep Pharma, and the Aberrant Economy. It was published in February 2024. There's a link to it. Mercer is described as, quote, a system builder. Distilled, her modus operandi has been to methodically apply first principles to the day's events. She's Jewish and grew up in Israel, from which she fled, age 19, but never to return. I don't know how old she is now. You can't tell from the picture, but I suspect she may be well into her 40s. Just a guess at this point. I haven't really researched her, but this is a stunning piece that we're going to cover at this point. The title of it, Why the Israeli-Occupied Levant Must Be Liberated, SOS. And the subtitle is, You Don't Negotiate with Charles Manson, John Wayne Gacy, and Jeffrey Dahmer. You stop them. This was published at the Unz Review on October 18th, 2024. The piece is 5,300 words. Here, of course, is a picture of devastation. I don't know whether it's in Gaza or in Lebanon right now. As fast as a snake's thrust, Israel has taken the methods of mass murder used against Gaza civilians to the West Bank, to Lebanon and Syria, to Yemen and beyond. It is now launching about for the next country to attack. Iran. This is the bloodiest in Israeli criminal annals. Still, it is the consensus among the best of people, pure-hearted and valiant all, that the only way to stop the Israeli state serial killers is passively and pacifistically, quote, for the U.S. to end all weapon shipments to Israel, unquote. And that, quote, the only way this will take place is if enough Americans make clear they have no intention of supporting any presidential ticket or any political party that fuels this genocide. It leaves us with the problem that one political party is in control right now and may be fueling this genocide, but the other political party has done nothing but give verbal support to this genocide while only making it clear that it would get the genocide done faster going forward. So spoke Chris Lynn Hedges, veteran war correspondent and journalist. Another man of first quality is Professor Jeffrey Sachs. To put an end to Israel's hourly slaying in Palestine and across the Levant, Professor Sachs, for one, recommends, quote, stopping Israel's ideology, of genocide. By this, he might mean a re-education or denazification program of sorts. It is unclear, however, how, quote, stopping, unquote, Israel's ideology of genocide, unquote, will end Israel's actual multi-fronted, high-tech, industrial-scale murder campaigns against Palestinians and their defending neighbors. Next section is called September-October Carnage. Life in the Israel-occupied Levant. At an astonishing clip, the Israeli criminal enterprise sped off to Lebanon. Israel's lobbies and Western enablers have now extended tacit permission for Israel's bombing campaign in Lebanon, visiting death and displacement on the villages of southern Lebanon and on the southern suburbs of Beirut, where entire city blocks have been demolished with ground-penetrating, bunker-busting American bombs. Within the span of 2 to 3 weeks and 10,000 strikes, 93% of which originated with Israel. I wonder where the other 7% came from. Some 2,500 individuals had been murdered in Lebanon. A quarter of the population has been displaced under eviction notice from their Israeli overlords. Israel's bombing of civilians has extended from the Bekaa Valley and the city of Baalbek into Beirut, beyond the Dahia, to the ancient Phoenician cities of Tripoli and Tyre in the northern part of Lebanon. Did I mention a strike on Lebanon's only airport? Forgive. No sooner do the news chyrons of death and destruction by demon state crawl across my screens, then these are out of date. Before the strafing of Lebanon, now in progress, Israel had infiltrated that sovereign country's supply chain of electronic devices to carry out one of, quote, the biggest acts of mass terrorism, unquote, to date. Thousands were maimed by detonating pagers. Dozens were murdered. Need I add that booby traps contravene the laws of armed conflict? I don't. You already knew that Israel relies for its existence on criminality. As free marketers, we harbor hope that Israel's repulsive tampering with humanity's personal devices will spur the local Lebanese industries. The free market will, in future, ensure that Israel's remote activation of sleeper devices will lend an edge to the kind of competition that advertises thus to consumers of electronic goods. Quote, our products are Israel proof. They cannot kill their users, unquote. Long-term hopes and predictions are no panacea for unhindered carnage in progress. Israel is bleeding the region like a leech. Its high-tech murder sprees across the Middle East must be viewed then as actionable. SOS, life and death emergencies. At the time of this writing, hundreds are dying daily by demon state. In Gaza's dilapidated, destroyed hospital structures, in its school-turned shelters, 28 desiccated on October 10th, in its refugee camps where the displaced huddle, dozens dead, in Deir al-Bala, on the central city streets of Beirut where 22 martyrs had been offered up for the October 12th Sabbath, in mosques, 19 souls taken on October 6th, in municipalities, markets, en route to fetch food and water. In Dank and Dylon, tents set ablaze, Al-Aqsa Hospital, patients incinerated in their beds. By the way, all this is linked. There are links to all the things I've just announced here. A funeral rap, way better than mine, is the raw throb, of Bobby, Bobbyy, the mysterious activist artist who has superimposed his lachrymose lyrics on images of the crushed, dismembered, and burned alive, rapped out in lamentation of, quote, 1 year of genocide, unquote. Quote again, a bomb descends and detonates, disembowels, eviscerates, torsos torn, shredded bodies, no heads, girls with no legs on their deathbeds, heads without skulls, hollowed out holes where there once were souls, dreams, and goals. A father's last cuddle in a blood-soaked puddle. A ghostly gray child hangs plucked from the rubble, unquote. No one is spared. Children, women, their men, reporters, rescuers, healthcare workers, and peacekeepers in Lebanon. Peacekeepers, according to Professor Sachs, are one of the bedrocks on which to erect the future superstructure of peace between Israelis and Palestinians. The blue helmets, however, are present in Lebanon. Israel has begun picking off the United Nations peacekeepers, for it respects no international symbol. In its unceasing carnage, Israel has now knocked out at least 4 major hospitals and 32 medical centers in Beirut in what the Hasbara, the Israeli propaganda uh, activity, bills as, quote, precision strikes, unquote, in the course of a, quote, a limited incursion, unquote. For their part, Palestinians keep trying to nest, to return to the Sisyphean piles of rubble that are their ruined homes. But Israel will have none of that. It wants to empty Gaza north of the Wadi Gaza and is currently revisiting northern Gaza, subjecting its dazed and confused survivors, quote, to one of the most violent campaigns of its genocide, unquote. So warns Euromed, the Monitor. In northern Gaza, the IDF is now killing whoever remains by, quote, saturation bombing, unquote, or by eviction, as in the renewed siege on the skeletal Kamal Adwan Hospital. Sneers, quote, the most moral army in the world. The innocents murdered are mostly legitimate targets on account of third parties, Hamas, Hezbollah, and Houthi fighters, are either lurking or lobbing projectiles nearby. Trust us, the Israelis smugly snarl. If a smorgasbord of humanity is killed by us, men, women, their children, their ancestors, their livestock, their land, their defenders, their storytellers, it is because the dead were either terrorists who needed killing or were in the vicinity of terrorists who needed killing. The kills were good, the killers are righteous. Besides, the killers' lives are worth more. And the hour in the life of Israel occupied Levant, links via antiwar.com, look like this. North Gaza attack signals the restart of ethnic cleansing. Israel attacks in Gaza kill 82 Palestinians over 3 days. Journalist, age 19, killed in Israeli bombing after being warned to end his Gaza reportage. Israel kills 100 children in Lebanon in 11 days. Israel strikes target aid trucks in Syria. Israeli strike on West Bank cafe wipes out a family. Unflagging zeal for generational genocide in Gaza has meant that so far Israel has wiped out 900 bloodlines in the enclave, the very definition of genocide. Hasbra Media. Israeli state terrorism is framed as self-defense, and the West acquiesces. The malodorous cauldron of lies that its corporate media have been conditioned by Israel and its Hasbra handmaidens. Day after day, the word from the media is the same. Quote, locked into the two sides paradigm, unquote. Western media still peddle hard the, quote, possibility, unquote, that Israel's strafing of Lebanon is legal, righteous. They still equate the bombing of the civilian structures of Gaza, the West Bank, and Lebanon, uh, uh, municipal buildings, medical clinics, and hospitals, media offices and officers, first responders, and mid-rescue fighter fighters with, quote, self-defense, unquote. Quote again, state terrorism redefined as self-defense, unquote, in the words of commentator Muin Rabbani. A media to whom the quote, punitive slaughter, unquote, of tens of thousands of civilians, the hacking of the private mobile devices of sovereign citizens, Palestinians, then Lebanese, so as to deliver sadistic, illegal marching orders, psychological warfare to millions, scattering them hither and thither. Northern Gaza is being evicted anew. Such a media's very mission is to elude the truth for Israel. Corporate media has lost the right to write news. A more reliable reporter from the ruins of Beirut's southern suburb is the prototypical elderly Arab gentleman interviewed 13 minutes into a Middle East Eye segment about Israel's Dahiyya doctrine. Quote, they're criminals. They are not fighting men with guns. They are killing women and children, unquote. Indeed, Israel's perverted, purely, quote, punitive slaughter, unquote, is made manifest in the latest documentary from acclaimed British journalist Richard Sanders. To mark 1 year of genocide, Israelis are on display in Gaza for the last year, burning with white-hot hatred and contempt for all Palestinians, nay, all Arabs, whom they clearly consider Untermensch, subhuman. Nowhere in evidence among the horribly brutalized bodies of Gazawi men, women, and babies is combat. Nowhere in evidence of bodies of boys carrying firearms or men kitted for combat. Even so, the only resistance to Israel's depredations in Gaza and beyond has come from Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Hamas, as well as from popular militia in Iraq and Syria. These fighters are the only forces resisting the mad dog of Medina. Medina is country in Hebrew, which has murdered 1 in every 55 Palestinians residing in Gaza. Responsibility to protect. Sayed Hassan Nasrallah saw his Good Samaritan duty as an obligation, not an option. Resistance fighters are heeding the highest calling, the quote, responsibility to protect, R2P. Make no mistake, Israel ought to have been resisted, its victims protected. In international humanitarian and customary human rights law, there is a, quote, responsibility to protect, unquote, a community that is being evicted and eradicated, while libertarians would regard the, quote, responsibility to protect, unquote, as largely voluntary. We naturally attach great moral virtue to the Good Samaritan, as did the late Sayed Hassan Nasrallah. Nasrallah, Secretary General of Hezbollah, saw his Good Samaritan duty as an obligation, not an option. His people agreed. Acting in the spirit of R2P, the responsibility to protect, Nasrallah did the honorable and principled thing. The legendary Shia leader stood foursquare with his Sunni brethren in Gaza against their Israeli mass murderers. The world stood by during the Holocaust, even though the final solution and the facts of the death camps were known to the Allied powers late in the war. The Muin Rabbani, aforementioned, has thus drawn a parallel. Unlike the Allies during the Nazi extermination of Jews and other minorities, Nasrallah, a man with moxie and morals, refused to sit idle as Israel slaughtered Palestinians in Gaza. Likewise, as Max Blumenthal likened Nasrallah's disruptions on Israel's northern border as the bombing of the railway tracks to Auschwitz. This, too, the Allied powers had failed to do. For coming to the defense of Gaza, Sayed Hassan Nasrallah, Professor Norman Finkelstein had called him, quote, the frankest, most impressive leader on the world stage, unquote, was martyred with American imprimatur and gotten completely tongue-tied on that one. Okay, it's the munitions going on. The payload consisted of 85 2,000-pound ground-penetrating bombs, quote, daisy-chained together. It was dropped by Israel on 6 apartment blocks in a residential suburb of Dahia in 4 separate rounds. Hundreds of Lebanese died with Hassan Nasrallah. I'd heard the estimate of 1,000 died. In its unalloyed depravity, Israel is ever scheming on or murdering potential future adversaries. In accordance with its killing just in case jurisprudence, Israel has since also slain Nasrallah's presumed successor, Hashem Safiuddin, in his family home. These prior restraint statist doctrines are reprehensible to libertarians and liberty lovers. Yet Israel has no qualms about them. Why? Because Arabs are not allowed to entertain resistance to Israel's crimes. Incidentally, guess where the Kiryat, Israel's central military compound, is located? In the heart of the city of Tel Aviv. By Israel's, quote, morals and logic, the Kiryat and its surrounds are legitimate targets for the resistance. Quote, mowing the lawn, unquote, is just another Israeli prior restraint criminal tactic in Israeli military baffle gab. It's called deterrence. The West Bank and East Jerusalem stolen. All that remain for the Palestinians are isolated outposts surrounded by blockades, barrier walls, checkpoints, and state-supported terrorists. Secure in the warm bath of superpower support, the Israelis, already uninhibited by normal standards of behavior, have gone into overdrive. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant now comfortably and brazenly speaks of, quote, mowing the lawn, unquote, in the occupied West Bank between Jenin and Hebron. Before brutalizing Lebanon civilians, Gallant had announced early in September to his largely depraved populace that, quote, the military has been, quote, mowing the lawn, unquote, during ongoing major operation against her groups in the West Bank, but will eventually need to, quote, pull out the roots, unquote, unquote. The current Israeli quest is to openly visit a Gaza-like annihilation on the West Bank and East Jerusalem. And now you're seeing the cover of another book by Ilana Mercer called Into the Cannibals Plot, Lessons for America from Post-Apartheid South Africa. It's a striking cover. Of course, I can't see who the publisher is. Going on with the article, genocide proper has come to the West Bank and East Jerusalem, which had only recently been invaded by columns of IDF Einsatzgruppen. Of course, those were units in the German army during the Second World War. Or maybe they were units in the SS. I've forgotten. The water torture has commenced. Taps have been turned off, quote, in Jerusalem's largest Palestinian neighborhood, according to the reporters of the Plus 972 magazine. Posses of settlers range across the West Bank in rampages of arson and plunder and with hubristic insolence. Begun on August 28th, the operation in the West Bank and East Jerusalem had been sadistically dubbed summer camps by IDF Desaad. By IDF standards, the economist Marquis Desaad was an amateur sexual sadist. The allusion is to hitting where resistance is fiercest in the refugee camps. While the offensive against civilians is much less intense than in Gaza, no, quote, saturation bombing, unquote, as yet, it is echoing it. Quote, summer camps, unquote, is thus part of an accelerated and, quote, concerted campaign to depopulate Palestine, unquote. Quote, under cover of war, unquote, seconds the Plus 972 investigative magazine. Quote, Israel is demolishing home after home in Silwan, an East Jerusalem neighborhood, having, quote, displaced dozens of Palestinian residents this year, unquote. The magazine, which manages somehow to sneak its reporters past Israeli snipers and into the occupied territories, confirms that, quote, the Israeli army is destroying West Bank civilian infrastructure, blocking medical access, and conducting mass arrests in its largest West Bank operation in years, unquote. Such arrests, 401 that we know of, mostly for offenses of speech by the admission of the Times of Israel, are being conducted in Israel proper, too. The implicit aim, again, is to purge Palestine of Palestinians by making life relentlessly risky. Between October 7th and September 30th of this year, there have been 895 Palestinian fatalities in the West Bank, including 201 children, reports OCHA. Again, while some strafing of civilians and their businesses from above has been carried out by the Israeli Air Force, the IDF's grotesquely destructive efforts have focused on bulldozing roads, gutting waterworks and sewage mains, surrounding, destroying, or just menacing mosques, markets, schools, universities, hospitals, and clinics. The desperate Bashir Madahan, Director of Public Relations and Media at the Jenin municipality, tells that, quote, the occupying Israeli forces have demolished more than 70% of his city streets completely, to a depth of approximately 1 to 1.5 meters, which has led to the destruction of water and sewage networks, as well as communication and electricity cables in areas that were demolished, initially estimated to cover 20 kilometers, unquote. All of which Francesca Albanese confirms. Via Ms. Albanese, UN Special Rapporteur to the occupied territories, comes confirmation of the reports of a full military assault on the West Bank, further damaging infrastructure already damaged in prior raids, and all the while instructing Palestinian occupants to abandon the coveted properties and evacuate en masse. The genocidal impetus is indeed underway in the West Bank. Palestinian dispossession in the West Bank is systemic, not sporadic. Sodomizing, strafing, and stealing from occupied Palestinians, these are all in a day's work for Israel's finest. News, then, that Israeli hands are deep in Palestinian tills comes as no surprise. Israel confiscated $265,000 from a money exchange shop in Hebron, reports the Middle East Monitor. In true obeisance to God's laws, B'Tselem, the internationally renowned Israeli human rights organization, has also tracked, quote, the forcible transfer of isolated Palestinian communities and single-farm families in Area C under cover of the Gaza fighting, unquote. Between October 19, 2023 and August 29, 2024, the people of 13 such hamlets had been removed from their ancestral lands. A way of life is being extinguished. In an August 27th report, B'Tselem anatomized the general method by which the Israeli military assists settlers in grabbing land speedily by erecting Minute-Maid, quote, outposts and, quote, agricultural farms, unquote, unquote. The trick is to informally establish facts on the ground and thus skirt any poorly enforced legal process. By the way, this process has been going on since the 1950s, okay, in Israel. In fact, the first instance, okay, of erecting a Minute-Maid outpost, if I recall correctly, actually occurred in 1948 in order to establish settler facts on the ground that would later be used to drive the Palestinians in the area into Gaza. Oh, Bonnie is reminding me that it is time for me to take uh, two pills that I generally take at this time of night or a little bit earlier. So, with your permission, I will take these two pills now. Oh, I have lost the pill. Well, I'll grab it later. Okay, thank you for that. I will find the other pill that I lost sometime later. The trick is to informally establish facts on the ground and thus skirt any poorly enforced legal process. By way of an example, but seldom deconstructs how the military assists settlers of, quote, of Meged Haaretz, unquote, in stealing the West Bank lands of Shufa and Kaffa. Quote, unlike formal multi-stage processes required to establish settlements, these settler outposts can be set up quickly and require relatively few resources and laborers. This method facilitates the state's ability to shirk responsibility for land seizures, as well as for the violent and illegal actions of the settlers who inhabit them, while simultaneously supporting these outposts in various ways, unquote. Quote, the settlers disturb the farmers working their land, deliberately provoking them and creating friction. They have also caused damage to hundreds of olive trees, agricultural structures, water containers and property, stolen equipment and livestock, sprayed graffiti and burned greenhouses. They have instilled constant fear in the farmers, taken control of land by shooting in the air, intimidating Palestinian shepherds, and prevented them from grazing their sheep and cattle in the area. Due to the violence and difficulty to access their grazing lands, some farmers have been forced to sell their lands as feeding their livestock with purchased feed is too costly, unquote. Their guns at the ready, the IDF soldiers look on as settlers rampage through West Bank villages, burning, looting, and yes, murdering. These settler pogroms are covered extensively by Or and Ziv of plus 972. On September 2nd, B'Tselem documented how, quote, undercover border police extrajudicially executed a military wing operative in front of bystanders in the Jenin industrial zone, unquote. Arrests? What for? Nothing to see here. Move along. Quote, if you try to defend yourself, you're dead, unquote, unquote. Attest the Palestinian victims. Resist the IDF and you die sans due process of the law. Heroically have the Palestinian farmers and sheep herders of the South Hebron Hills struggled to uphold their ancestral lifestyle. They live in daily fear for their lives and the lives of family and livestock. How much longer can they linger without urgent and active intervention to uphold their basic rights to life, liberty, and property? Notwithstanding settler land theft en masse, a lot of people are staying with the story of the two-state solution. But what about it then? The two-state solution killed. The object of any future Palestinian state must be security first, not amity and a, quote, never again mindset. There is slim to no chance of a contiguous Palestinian state alongside Israel, given that Israel's settlement policy in the West Bank has ensconced near 1 million Jews on Palestinian lands throughout the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Monomaniacally focused, state-supported, outlaw settlers are violently stealing Palestinian lands as we speak. Close to 1 million of them, if we include East Jerusalem. All that remains for the Palestinians are isolated outposts surrounded by blockades, barrier walls, checkpoints, and state supported terrorists. To the extent it was ever sincere, the two-state solution was killed by Israel and, quote, the Israel State's auxiliary armed forces, unquote, Dr. Rabbani's moniker for the settlers. The coming into being of a continuous Palestinian territory has been made impossible. Considering that settlers and their ideology have tentacular reach into Israeli institutions, civil and state, the chances for a two-state solution are vanishingly small. Take the judiciary. Punishment for settler land theft and other felony crimes perpetrated against Palestinians in occupied Palestine is almost unheard of, as illustrated in the chapter, quote, Israel's Law of Rule in the West Bank, unquote, in the essay Defending Gaza 2. Israel engaged in the mother of all performative contradictions, denying genocide while committing genocide, effectively asserting a right to genocide, unquote. But Salem has published countless research exposés on the marriage between the Israeli state and its settler, quote, auxiliary armed forces. That is to say, the Israeli brown shirts. Those are the brown shirts, the auxiliary armed forces. Even the idea of, quote, the two peoples getting along and actually drawing strength from each other, quote, is Panglossian at this stage. By the way, I think that's a quote from Jeffrey Sachs there. Pangloss is the, quote, unfailingly optimistic character in Candide Voltaire's 1759, quote, satire on philosophical optimism. Palestinians have been martyred en masse by their Jewish supremacist neighbors who've shown themselves to be mired as a society in unspeakable debaucheries and uncommonly capable of exterminating Palestinian survivors. Who would fall into such a homicidal trap again? Given the threat to their very existence, Palestinians must not be forced into existential ennui by the West. They already are like a mouse before a cat. Given this reality, the object of any future Palestinian state must be security first, not amity with Israel. That and a, quote, never again, unquote, mindset. Any future Palestinian state is useless unless it affords the most imperiled people in the world the ability to defend against the most perilous people in the world. Next section is called Living Alongside Serial Killing Sexual Sadists. The pairing in Israel of sexual arousal and violence toward Palestinians makes for a particularly irremediable pathology, the stuff of serial killers. Israel's bacchanalia in Gaza and the West Bank includes a gulag of clandestine rendition torture camps, wherein thousands of Palestinian detainees languish without charges or due process and are systemically and systematically raped, beaten, starved, and left traumatized, twisted and deformed, disabled, or dead. Quote, something very sick and evil is happening in Israel's jails. Welcome to hell is not an exaggeration, unquote, reports the legendary Peter Osborne. Honed in rendition torture camps, sexual violence has become the coin of the greater Israel realm. settler conquerors now roam the hamlets of the South Hebron Hills out loud and proud in threatening rape. Apparently, raping another helpless man is considered manly in Israel, a country that is otherwise more woke than any in the West. In the one unremarkable vignette filmed uh, um, uh, filmed by Salab, an armed settler threatens a Palestinian farmer in the South Hebron Hills with rape. Quote, rape in the name of God. Our SD Taman promises settler Shem Tov Lusky to a horrified Palestinian. And yet another typical settler vignette, Turkish TV captured a uniformed IDF manhandling himself on camera in a manner not fit to print, reflexively, apparently threatening a helpless group of Palestinian homesteaders has aroused this IDF. Quote, Holy Redemption, Stealing Palestinian Lands, unquote, a TRT world exclusive documentary plainly follows and records these settlers in character. There is no editorializing. 29 minutes and 20 seconds into this TRT settler odyssey, we find said IDF soldier in cahoots with settlers hissing, quote, I spit on Palestine, F-CK, your mother, I'm the Israeli army, unquote. He is not done. Just as I imagine, this breed of Cain could not expose itself as more indecent. The hissing uniform IDF soldier comes close to indecent exposure. At the said timestamp, that's 29 minutes and 20 seconds, the atavistic lowbrow individual shows himself to be lacking the inhibitions to keep his perversion private. The Palestinian olive goers and shepherds of the austere Hebron Hills are necessarily a Spartan people. For centuries, they have made things grow despite arid soil and the scarcity of water. They look like they belong, like authentic outdoor folk. The settlers, on the other hand, look ridiculous, out of place, in marked contrast to the dignity of the Palestinians of the Hebron Hills, settler flotsam and jetsam um, 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 are an epitome of degeneracy. Why then would Palestinians, a traditional, rather regal people, wish to, quote, draw strength, unquote, and inspiration in the future from their genocidal neighbors, the great Israeli unwashed, who have done to them things that make the thickest skin crawl? This I ask in the context of peacemaking, for also talked up among some as a utopic time when, quote, the two peoples, Jewish, Israeli, and Palestinians, will get along and actually draw strength from each other. Daily, the Palestinians' closest neighbors, the settlers, make manifest their red-hot hatred toward them, stealing land, regularly slaughtering helpless livestock with biblical cruelty, and generally menacing Palestinian property owners. Most disturbing is the overt, perverted sexual sadism of settlers and their soldier helpers. The Nazis, whose spiritual heirs Israel is shaping up to be paradoxically, hid their systematic crimes against humanity. Israeli Jews, a majority at least, either celebrate or are callously nonchalant about felonies, perversions, and crimes against Palestinians. Israeli shamelessness is the quality that has helped the Al Jazeera investigation unit, the IU, commit to a database thousands of videos, photos, and social media posts, quote, posted online by Israeli soldiers themselves during the year-long genocide, unquote, in the Gaza Strip. The exulting whoops of individual IDF soldiers mid-murder are now part of a dossier, a database. Quote, where possible, the investigation unit has identified the posters and those who appear, unquote, leaving the International Criminal Court with little else to do but to verify and then initiate criminal proceedings. Small wonder IDF squirrels are frantically deleting their social media accounts pursuant to the airing of, quote, war crimes in Gaza, unquote, and to the filing by Belgium's, quote, Hin Rajab Foundation. Hind, of course, it was the little girl who was killed in her car after the killing of her whole family. She was the sole survivor. And the Israelis once more machine gunned the car to finally kill her after she was alone for a considerable time. Anyway, in Belgium, there's a foundation that is dedicated to her. And they filed a complaint to the ICC against at least 1,000 IDF putative war criminals. Israelis, soldier sons and daughters are the stars in the country's genocide constellation. In addition to, quote, a range of illegal activities, from wanton destruction and looting to the demolition of entire neighborhoods and murder, unquote, what emerges most palpably from war crimes in Gaza, quote unquote, and from my own year-long observations, is the sexual undercurrent that accompanies IDF sadism, from pilfering Palestinian women's panties to raping their men. The nub and the rub of it, how do you extinguish, for the purposes of peacemaking, pathologically murderous sexual arousal? Do you chemically castrate IDF soldiers and settlers? That's a question mark. What of Israeli society? It too is a picture of moral decadence. Israeli sofa TV pundits are as chatty and blasé about mowing the lawn as they are about the sexual rupturing of Palestinian autonomy. Israelis themselves have partied on. It's vodka in the bars, volleyball on the beaches, all the while a few kilometers south of the Dionysian debauchery is genocide. Watch footage montage from Israel proper, and there's a link to that, of course, and a link to almost everything else that I've been reading. Down south, I mean, this article is a forest of links documenting the words that are said here by reference to other articles, to videos, and so on. Down south of the coast from these frolicking Israelis on Gaza's shores, fishermen are blown out of the water should they try to fish to feed their families. Quote, how Israel destroyed Gaza's ability to feed itself, unquote. This is from Al Jazeera, July 2nd, 2024. What other country proudly names one of its killer creeds the, quote, Dahiyya Doctrine, unquote, quote, after an area of Beirut where it had perfected its predation? No other than Israel. Israel is the proud promulgator of the immoral, illegal, quote, doctrine of inflicting massive harm to civilians, unquote, perversely named for its victims. Imagine a serial killer, Randall Woodfield, for example. He hunted along Highway I-5, calling his killer craft the, quote, Highway I-5 doctrine, unquote. Imagine Wikipedia describing Woodfield as originator of the, quote, I-5 doctrine. By all accounts, special prestige is attached in Jewish Israeli society to the perpetrators of the kind of crimes that, quote, knock the cosmos out of kilter, unquote. Rescue plan required, not a political strategy. When a serial killer is loosed in your neighborhood, crime reduction social programs are not the things you reach for. Imagine your 9/11 dispatcher answering your, quote, I am dying, send help, unquote, emergency call with, quote, we are working on community-based crime reduction strategies, unquote. By extension, boycotts and embargoes relate to Israel mid-murder as crime reduction policies relate to a crime in progress. It would seem fair to surmise then that stopping an ideology, Israel's genocidal mindset, or America's sacralization of Israel, is a long-term endeavor, okay, a strategy, political or other. Does not a rescue plan make a long-term strategy? Is not the answer to an SOS life and death situation. When a serial killer is loosed in your neighborhood, crime reduction, social programs, or political strategies are not the things you reach for. Crime reduction strategies, in the case of Israel, are those long-term incentive-based plan to increase humanity's safety and security by disincentivizing an entity that has proven to constitute a danger to the comity and safety of nations. The private, voluntary, slow-motion boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, quote, works to end international support for Israel's oppression of Palestinians and pressure Israel to comply with international law, unquote. Voluntary economic boycotts on Israel and mandatory state embargoes on shipments of weapons to Israel. These are all well and good, but they are long-term strategies, not SOS interventions in regional mass murder ongoing. These are not solutions to the problem of a mass murderer loosed on the Middle East. Israel is a promiscuous and licentious killer. To the mass murdering Medina, the lives of Arabs are as cheap as the talk we in the West deploy about, quote, stopping Israel, unquote. We've watched all civilizations' edifices destroyed by Israel, from the sanctity of life, liberty, and property to well-meaning legal frameworks designed to uphold these inalienable individual rights. Israel, moreover, is humanity's most barbaric instantiation. Not only does it target humanity's most vulnerable, but also its finest and noblest, the people we must rely on, altruistic aid and rescue workers, healers in their clinics, uh, 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 ministering to their patients, peace activists, writers, reporters, and intellectuals recording the crimes for posterity. For the better part of a year, we, the people of Rome's provinces, have appealed to Rome on the Potomac. The magnificent human rights and rescue community has, quote, warned, unquote, and cajoled the axis of genocide, begged anyone they could buttonhole while working and dying with their Palestinian charges in the field. No petition to the United States has worked so far. America is not the solution, it's the problem. On top of its already strong presence in the region as a standby and backup to its cheerless satellite, the United States is now sending Israel, quote, an advanced anti-missile system and soldiers to operate it, unquote, symbolically at least, deepening America's craven commitment to Israel's genocidal war on Gaza, the West Bank, and their regional defenders. Because he considers Israel a rib from the United States rib cage, Matthew Miller at Fargy Bottom gives us the talk. Quote, we're calling on our Israel allies to improve their ways in war, to look into this or that massacre having spontaneously materialized in Palestine. These massacres are indeed very disturbing, unquote. Riley, the electronic intifada's Ali Abu Nima, Palestinian activist and thinker, offers up an apt syllogism for this American-Israeli stagecraft. 58 minutes into a conversation with journalist extraordinaire Rania Kalik. Quote, these reports of young men and women disappearing across America and showing up brutally murdered are very disturbing. We ask Charles Manson and John Wayne Gacy and Jeffrey Dahmer to carry out a very serious investigation and to hold those responsible accountable. It is really important that we hold people accountable, so we would really like Jeffrey Dahmer, John Wayne Gacy, and Charles Manson to investigate this. And the United States will work with them to do that. We cannot be lulled into the torpor of such talk. Bullies must be stood up to and stopped. By definition, a bully is a coward. A bully, especially one imbued with a messianic, millenarian sense of supremacy, understands one thing: a united show of force. Israel's regional serial killing needs to be stopped forthwith and by force. The attitude of the Arab countries, the Arab League, has been to let Israel do what it wants just so long as they were not the ones being targeted. But then they were. The nub and the rub. War on civilians is a war on civilization. The coward's aggression must be forcefully and righteously countered. The Israeli state, which continues to operate outside the remits of man-made law and God's law, must be defanged. You don't but negotiate with Charles Manson, John Wayne Gacy, and Jeffrey Dahmer. The plan to stop Israel will have to involve righteous regional counterforce. But details next, which I think means that we should be anticipating another piece from Mercer very, very soon. Once again, Alana Mercer is a paleo-libertarian author, essayist, and theorist. Her new book is, quote, The Paleo-Libertarian Guide to Deep Tech, Deep Pharma, and the Aberrant Economy, unquote. This is published in February 2024. Mercer is described as, quote, a system builder. Distilled, her modus operandi has been to methodically apply first principles to the day's events, unquote. She's Jewish and grew up in Israel, from which she fled, age 19, never to return. And there's the copy of the cover of her new book, The Paleo-Libertarian Guide. I suppose I don't have to say that was an utterly brilliant piece, and its final point, of course, is compelling. We have, an SOS. We have to stop the genocide now. She rejects, of course, the possible solution that she thinks of as pacifistic, that we put sufficient pressure on the government of the United States to stop the shipment of arms, to genocide, because she regards that, as something less than an immediate stopping, of the genocide. I disagree. That could happen very quickly if enough people got out into the streets here and the administration felt forced to stop the shipment of arms to Israel, because it's calculated that Israel can only keep killing in the Levant for a relatively few days as soon as the arms shipments are stopped. So that might be, an effective strategy. But I don't want to be pacifistic about this. It's obvious that an armed intervention might stop Israel much more quickly and save lives in the process. Even if we were to mobilize very quickly millions and millions of Americans over the next 2 or 3 weeks to pressure the government, it is very questionable whether Joe Biden could be moved. His behavior so far doesn't make such a possibility an encouraging possibility. Now, you could say the same about the alternative of collective action, collective action by the people of the Middle East. She calls for one thing: a united show of force. Okay, but a united show of force from whom? The Arab countries don't appear to have the will to develop a united show of force. The axis of resistance is the closest thing we have to a united show of force. And it is true that there is a possibility that a united show of force by the axis of resistance might stop Israel, though at the cost of really breaking the Israeli state and creating chaos in Israel. How might this come about? The Iranians have threatened a retaliation if the Israelis attack them in retaliation for their show of force on October 1st. The Iranians have threatened to send 2,000 ballistic missiles to Israel. Such an attack, if correctly targeted at the infrastructure of Israel and certain parts of the population, specifically the parts that have been most active in committing and furthering the genocide, if targeted in this way, this could create a sufficient amount of chaos in Israel that it would stop the IDF in its tracks in terms of actually committing the genocide. Of the two alternatives to quickly stop the genocide, I have to say that right now, as we sit here on October 19th, the one that is most likely to stop it is the Iranian retaliation in combination with Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Iraqi resistance, and Hamas itself. If they all attacked in unison, along with the Iranian attack that we describe, this might well bring Israel to its knees, bring down the regime in Israel, and bring Israel to the conference table. Of course, if we bring Israel to the conference table, even if Israel is on its knees at this point, that still would not necessarily make it safe for the Israeli state and a new Palestinian state to live side by side in safety and security. I agree with Alana that it's very difficult, to visualize this. But it would be much less difficult if the settlers were driven out of the West Bank and east of Jerusalem, and if they were persuaded to go back to their home countries or to repatriate to Israel itself. They might be persuaded by the unified action I spoke of, a few minutes ago. That would change the facts on the ground that are making it impossible for a two-state solution. If we couple that with the forced disarming, of the Israelis, and the placing of peacekeepers between the two states, we might be able to have a Palestinian state, an Israeli state, and the prospect of long-term peace between the two. But we have to be realistic. The Israelis would have to be so beaten down that they would have to agree to give up their military power and to rely on the rest of the world for their security. And the same conditions would apply to a new Palestinian state that would also be disarmed. Something like that would have to obtain. Or another possible solution, well, that goes beyond the scope, of this stream. I could speculate here all night or think this through, but this has already gone on for 2 hours, and I have reached the point of needing to bring things to a close. There's one other thing that, if I could find it, I thought was worth you seeing, because it places context it gives us some context for the rationale for the kind of attack, that I was talking about here. Let me see if I can easily find it. There was a tweet from Desolation Angel today that depicted the greater Israel vision. I thought I would be able to find it because it was near the top of my notifications this morning, but unfortunately I'm not able to bring it up now. Let me see if I can do this better. I might have gone past it. It was something I want to share because so few people, okay, are really aware of the vision that stands behind, uh, the Israeli attempted genocide in Gaza. It stands behind the ethnic cleansing, and also the genocide. So now I guess I'm not able to find it. Okay, it was a map, okay, of the greater Israel. Uh, it was a map of the greater um, um, Israel concept. Okay, that was posted by my friend uh, Amber Grigo, who is the Desolation Angel. Okay, I mentioned. Um, yeah, I've gotten to a page now, so that should be an easier way to find this. There it is. So, I am now sharing. I should be sharing. You should be seeing. Yes. This is a map, okay, of Greater Israel. I don't know how many of you have seen this before. I've seen it quite a few times before. But whenever I look at it, it is always always shocking. This is the Greater Israel Project, also known as Israeli colonial expansion. This exemplifies the ambitions of the right-wing Israelis, some of the right-wing Israelis who were part, of the current Israeli government. It's their long-term vision of what the promised land, uh, taken from the book of Joshua, is supposed to look like. Uh, it's a concept of Israel that extends from the Nile River through Suez, of course, through a large part of Saudi Arabia, the whole of Jordan, also Lebanon, most of Syria, some of Turkey, and half of Iraq, all supposedly destined to be Israeli territory, the new borders, of Israel. An Israeli superstate, which Israel, of course, doesn't have anywhere near the population to fill or the population to control. But this is one of the concepts lying behind the genocide and the actions of the Israeli right wing and the actions of the IDF, in Israel. This is one of the ideas endorsed by the strange group of rabbis currently living inside of Israel. And I hasten to add, totally unrepresentative of what the Jewish rabbis worldwide have to say. That many of them, of course, respect Palestinian rights and are completely opposed to the genocide. But the truly orthodox Jewish rabbis in diaspora have from the beginning doubted the very legitimacy of the Israeli state, saying that it was founded against, the will of God, and is an abomination. Certainly, their case concerning the nature of Israel has been greatly strengthened by the behavior of the Israelis in recent times. So I wanted you to see, the greater Israel map before I end this stream. Thank you, Amber, for posting such a good version of this map, today. So I will now take some other comments. I see that I have more people, who are attending the stream now. Oh, God, Robert. Evelina says, reasonable but no less impassioned conclusion at which she arrives after this grueling saga. It is a grueling saga, isn't it? A grueling saga, but a great piece of writing. Dee says, thank you for a great show. Thank you, Dee. Robert Copeland says, Joe, I don't like your attitude, and I found out Ukraine has a population of 38 million people. It certainly does not. That is a lie, Robert. I don't know where you got that particular lie from. It might have had 38 million people in 2022 when the SMO started. But now those people have left by the millions, and the current population of Ukraine is estimated by observers who have been following the war and the movements of population at 18 to 20 million people. That is the reality right now. There is no 38 million people there. And by the way, I don't care if you like my attitude or not. I don't like yours. You are terribly close-minded and relying wholly on Western sources. You are resisting reality. I personally hate that. John B. said, I'm of the opinion a two-state solution is now impossible. Well, so is Alana Mercer. So is Miko Pellet. So is Scott Ritter. Many people think that a two-state solution is now impossible, and for the same reasons that are stated by Alana. And I understand those reasons. You can't have a two-state solution simply because the settlers have occupied most of the area of what would be a Palestinian state. But what I'm saying is that the two-state solution could be made possible again if those settlers are driven out. And I am saying that a military solution by the Iranians might create the facts on the ground necessary for a two-state solution to be practical again. That's a different argument. I agree, without Israeli renouncing apartheid, it is morally acceptable to all decent nations. Any vestige of Israel's former ideology is abhorrent to, and you don't say what else, but I think you mean it's abhorrent to peace. And I agree also. But understand, I am postulating a situation where after the attack by the Axis of Resistance, Israel will be prostrate and on its knees and will be forced to negotiate a peaceful solution. And that in that situation, the settlers will be gone, the political basis of Israel will be different, and there will be different possibilities for a solution, and the two-state solution might again become very possible. Now, maybe this is a dream. The alternative, of course, is to have a single state of Palestine, okay, which would be a democracy in which both Jews and Palestinians could live in peace. I personally find that to be a rather impractical solution because uh, given what the Israelis have done to the Palestinians, uh, I don't see how the two peoples can live in peace uh, for a long time to come. It will be decades before that is possible. But during those decades, I think a two-state solution with peacekeepers, two disarmed states, would be possible. And with the encouragement of trade between the two states, ties may develop over decades so the two states would live in peace. John B. points out it goes deeper than settlers, Joe. To Israeli government enables the settlers' action. Clearing the settlers doesn't remove the cause of apartheid. Well, it goes a long way. The reason why is because the political support for the right wing and for the apartheid state is being provided by the million settlers. They're the reason why the right wing has taken over the Israeli political system. If they are cleared out, it creates different facts on the ground, both for the possibility of having an area in which a Palestinian state could be founded, but also having a political situation inside of Israel where the ideology of apartheid and the ideology of Israeli supremacy could be laid to rest. So, yeah, I know it goes deeper than the settlers. The Israeli government has to be changed too. I am postulating that in the collapse of Israel that would occur following the attack of the axis of resistance, Israel at that point might be weak enough that the remaining population would be willing to change. We have seen major changes in populations following serious military defeats before. Of course, the two exemplary cases of this occurred following the Second World War, when, for a time at least, Japan and Germany, both of those two societies, were molded in an entirely different way following the World War. But after serious defeats and unconditional surrenders, of course, I'm assuming the devastation of Israel caused by the Iranian attack would lead to the Israelis coming to the conference table and would make them amenable to a peace that would be imposed upon them. So I don't think a unified government would be a sustainable solution at this point. because I can hardly believe that, first of all, if there were a one-state solution, I think the Palestinians would be dominating the political system of that state. And it's hard for me to believe they wouldn't be revenging themselves upon the Israelis, okay, in that situation, so that there would not be peace. Anyway, that, okay, is my opinion. I'm certainly open to changing it. Okay, John B., that I think there are problems, okay, with a unified government solution as well. I think I'm going to leave it there for tonight. I hope, okay, you appreciated this. I noticed that since this was, there must be some decent Israelis that would be acceptable to Palestinians. Oh, I think they are, but they've been remarkably politically silent in the context of the whole crisis. I would have thought that 40 to 45% of the Israelis were decent, and that they would not be the ones that would be leaving Palestine. That they were the ones that would be staying. But still, I mean, the brutalization of the Palestinians, I mean, it's worse than the brutalization of the Africans under the Boers in South Africa. I mean, the devastation visited upon the Palestinians over the last year. I mean, it is just incredibly evil. Just incredibly evil. But anyway, thank you for your comments, John B. It is time to go. Uh, I will see you again, most probably on Tuesday. I think I'll need a little bit of time to recover from this stream, which was very emotional in many ways. Evelina says, thanks, Dr. Joe. Good night. Thank you, Evelina, for coming. Thank you for your patience. And thank all of you for coming. But even you, Robert, thank you for coming as well. Okay, so I'll see you next time. If Dee has a show tomorrow night, I may stop in at her stream. It all depends on how recovered I am from this one. John B. says, thanks, Joe. Okay, thank you, John B. Also, I should add in closing, I'm not convinced that a two-state solution, even under the conditions that I specified, would be practical. I just don't think that a one-state solution, I don't think that would be practical either. But I'm not sure between the two. I am not sure. I think they both are fraught with difficulty, given the bitterness which is likely and justifiably be characteristic of the approach of the Palestinians. I think the Palestinians would have to be saintly to accept a peace agreement with the Israelis, even in the context of a disarmed Israeli state. I mean, after what's been done to the Palestinians,
How could they live together?
I mean, I just don't know. Anyway, I'm sure we'll be discussing this again, at another time. So I am going to end the stream on this note. I see that Bonnie is waiting for me to end it.
That was terrible. You're not terrible, but it's just the whole thing is sickening.
Yeah, Bonnie just thought the whole thing was sickening, and I must agree. Good night, everyone.